Welcome, everybody. I'm going to take off my screen share so we can see everybody. Great to have you all here. This is the first of what will be I think about a 9-part series. So this is not a one-time shot. For those of you who wanted to be here today and get all the answers today in 50 minutes, I'm going to disappoint you. This is the beginning of a long conversation, right? Rome wasn't built in a day. The kingdom of God is 2,000 years in the making, and we're not done yet. This is going to be the beginnings of a conversation. And by the way, it's a conversation part of the church is also having in another venue. And I'll show you in one second. Christ Church Cranbrook also has a women's spirituality group that is going to be doing a series on this book, A Language of Healing for a Polarized Nation. So for those of you who are part of the women's spirituality group, I know there's some crossover. I really invite you, bring the wisdom that you're picking up in that class as that we move parallel in these conversations. That series is going to be a little bit broader. It's going to talk about how we talk about racism, how we talk about cultural differences, how we talk about political differences, how we talk about a number of differences. This series will focus more on politics, on how do we bring grace to our political conversation. So let me just say a couple words of introduction about what this series is about and what it's not about. I got an email over the weekend from somebody who was a little concerned that maybe it's not the best idea for Christ Church Cranbrook to be hosting a political debate show in the midst of an election, and or perhaps to offer a series where we purport to give the correct Christian position on all of the political issues facing us. A kind of how would Jesus vote class. She was being overly polite when she suggested that would not be the best idea. I actually think that would be a disastrous idea. And I want to assure you that is neither one of those is what this is about, okay? We're not going to debate politics. We're not going to debate the candidates in the upcoming election. I would never even dream of trying to suggest the correct Christian perspective on some of our political issues that we have being debated in the news. I think fair-minded and loving, good faith Christians can disagree and probably should disagree. But more importantly, they should be able to do so free of any accusation that they are somehow unchristian. So that's kind of my perspective on this. So this is not going to be a class about talking politics, okay? This is going to be a series about how we talk about politics. Specifically, how can we be peacemakers in political dialogue? How can we bring Christian values of humility and understanding and listening and forgiveness and reconciliation? How can we bring that to the one place that many of us avoid because it is so difficult right now? That's the challenge. By the way, we are jumping in the deep end when we make that claim, when we make that hope. So bear with me. I hope we live up. If we can live up to half of what this class is hoping to aspire to, I think we will made a lot of progress. All right, so let me just bring up some logistics here so you all can see where we are headed. And I'm going to share my screen. There we go. This is the cover page of the book that we're going to be using as our guide. I think you're wrong, but I'm listening. Grace-filled political conversations. You can buy the book if you'd like on Amazon. It was being offered for free on Kindle if you have an Amazon Prime account. I'm not sure that it's still doing that. So if not, you can purchase the book on Amazon or on any number of other places. I do want to say it is not required or necessary for you to order the book and read the book to get value out of this series, okay? We are going to be summarizing each chapter, giving you the key takeaways each week. So you can follow along without having the book at all. And I want to invite you to do so. This is the schedule. So I mentioned this isn't a one-time class, right? This is the series that we're going to try to do here starting today, and we're going to tackle a different chapter each week. So if you are going to follow along, you can see which chapters we're going to cover. And what's more, you don't have to listen to me every week. We have a wonderful variety of talented and wise and faithful co-presenters who are going to be taking each one of the weeks as we go. And I will be along to kind of, stitch it all together. And I think Father Bill and Pastor Manish will pop in from time to time as they are can. I do want to point out, though, that on November 8th, on Sunday, November 8th, we will be joined by the authors of the book. And they will be here to do a kind of Q&A. We will have been at this for four or 5 weeks by that point, and we will have bound to have a lot of questions for them, right? What were you thinking? Or how is this isn't working, or whatever. So that'll be a chance. We'll have them for the full hour, and we can have a great conversation with them. I'm looking forward to that. On the website, you'll notice those folks they've been interviewed by every cable news network of the spectrum, and they are lovely people. And I'll say a few more words about them as we go. But they are a Republican and they are a Democrat. They are two women who are friends, and they have challenged themselves to practice what they're preaching. And they've been doing a podcast together for about 5 years, where they have kind of honed the practices that we are going to be sharing in this series. So this isn't theory. They're working it in real life. And I think the name of their podcast is, if you want to look it up, if you're a podcast person, Pantsuits Politics, something like that. So that's the series, and we'll end it at the end of November. One thing I will point out is, you notice this series takes us right through the election, doesn't it? So we are diving into the deep end, and we're doing it at probably the most contentious time we could imagine. So I want to just say a word of appreciation for all of you to have the courage to even be here. So the welcome and thank you. So, hopefully this will be helpful to us as we go through this election process, however it all winds out. And we'll go through it together, right? And we'll share each other's experiences and share how the wisdom from this series is helping us to cope with the inevitable political conversations we'll be having. So I'm gonna stop right there and just pause and ask, is there any questions about what I just shared or introduced? And we have some folks from Arizona greeting us. Fantastic. Anybody? Okay. I'm going to ask, could one of the facilitators, maybe, I don't know, Joe, maybe, I don't know, I picked you. Would you be just sort of taking a roll of who's here, just so we have an idea? I'm not going to have time to do that. And Facebook or Zoom doesn't tell me that necessarily. And so that way, if I know who's here, I can send you guys out any handouts or links that we share. Okay, so we can kind of be a resource to one another. So if Joe, if you're cool with that, or just sort of give me a heads up. If not, maybe Betsy, you could do it and just make a list of everyone who's on the call. Okay, no questions? We're good? We're all comfortable?
Good to go.
Good to go. All right. So let's dive in here, and I'm just going to begin with the question that they kind of begin. I'm going to make this kind of a conversation. You know, it's hard to do with this many people, but we'll do the best we can. Here's the question for you all, and you can pose it to yourself and ask yourself. You don't have to answer it live, but if you'd like to, you can. Were you taught growing up to not talk politics in your home or in your family? Were you taught to talk politics, or were you taught to not talk politics? Right? We all know the rule: don't talk politics, don't talk religion. Right? What was your experience, and what impact, and that's really the question, is what is the impact that had on you, do you suppose, in your relationship with politics? Anybody want to break the ice and give an answer to that? Offer your answer?
Sure. Chris, I will.
Go ahead.
So I grew up in a household with 9 people, 7 children, 2 adults. So we were kind of, pick your dynasty, Kennedy or Rockefeller or Bush-esque without the fame or the fortune. My mother was a FDR, Democrat, Bar Harbor, Maine, dyed in the wool, Katharine Hepburn-esque Democrat. My father is a Eisenhower, Nixon until he resigned, dyed in the wool Republican. So we talked politics around the table. And each one of them always voted for the right candidate. It just always ended up being a Democrat for mom and a Republican for dad.
Yes.
But they encouraged conversation among the 7 of us around the table. Mom's also the daughter of a minister, Episcopalian minister. So we also talked politics. So we broke 2 of the taboos right out of the gate. But the one thing they encouraged was make a good argument, use information, support your statements. And they kept it was pretty civil.
Yeah, good, yeah. Anybody else have that experience or something different? That was my experience, by the way, Chris, growing up.
Oh, right.
The kitchen table was a place to talk politics. My dad was a political science major. My grandpa and grandma were opposites. My grandfather used to proudly tell me, Christopher, you'll be happy. I went to the polls today and I canceled out your grandmother like I always do every year. They had a net zero effect on the elections, their whole marriage of some 50 years. Anyone else?
Sorry.
Go ahead.
I came from an incredibly political family. There was no disagreement. To vote Democratic was perhaps to vote a little bit too far to the right. I went on the Washington March on the White House against the war in '69. My brother and sister belonged to all kinds of stuff. My whole family has a long history of marching around, sponsoring political candidates in our backyards.
Oh, wonderful. Excellent. Yeah, I grew up as a kid hanging out at the Democratic Party headquarters, playing with balloons and straw hats. My stepfather was a political activist, and my mother and he used to do go to all that stuff. And so, yeah, I totally identify with that. And by the way, it caused me to have to rebel, right? So I had to become a Republican when I went to college in order to rebel. So I've been all over the map politically. Anyone else want to offer feedback about this? Here's my theory. My theory is this. The kitchen table political discussions, whether they're with our family or even with our friends, I think it was a staple of our civic life in the past, more so in a different way than it is today. I think that's a thesis of mine.
I'd like to jump in on that thesis.
Yeah.
This is Hunter Torres speaking. And my dad was an Episcopal priest at a time when that meant, a year of urban living in a derelict apartment was exactly what our family needed to be doing to really understand. It was Vietnam, it was getting arrested. So there was an awful lot of conversation about politics. Just always. And for me, I think you're right, Father Chris, that was part of that time and certainly part of the culture I grew up in, and not so much now. For me, growing up in a family where, of course, you talk about your views, of course, you talk about these things, made me a little bit naive, because as an adult, I have been really surprised how few people want to have those conversations with me if they are people who know my view is different from theirs. And it's caused me, the reason I wanted to attend this forum is because I don't know how to reconcile that. And it's caused me to shockingly have to separate from some friendships. And it's so painful. And I feel like, wow, I grew up with this view that of course this was part of our discourse as people together. And I think I was not understanding how many may not share that view.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that
I had just the opposite. My parents were not involved politically. And although I think they had opinions, you sure didn't hear them around the house, and certainly not over the dinner table. So I think if the impact of that is, I don't know how to do it. You know, I had no modeling of that dynamic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and as you were saying that, Elise, I saw people nodding their head as well. So I think that's also a common experience. Let me go back to to what I want to present today, and I just as a way of setting the table. Today's class is really we're going to set the table, as I just said. We're going to present. I'm just going to summarize that first chapter about why the authors really suggest we should talk politics, and also why we aren't. What's the problem here? How did things get so off the rails that it has now become a really thorny, right? I hear it every day. People aren't talking to certain friends anymore. They no longer talk to certain neighbors. They've been defriended. I put a post on Facebook yesterday. Was it yesterday or Friday when the president was diagnosed with COVID, right? And the first lady. I put a very innocuous, simple post, holding the president and first lady and their family in my prayers this morning, hoping for a speedy recovery, something like that. Simple. It's the same prayer that I think Joe Biden tweeted. Oh my God, go to my Facebook page and read the comments. It became a huge battle of a lot between Christians, many of them, right? About whether or not we could even pray for the president. And so I have sympathy, and I'm not judging anything. But it just struck me that the degree to which that simple act of a simple prayer triggered this incredible debate about whether or not we should, or, well, you better add a bunch of caveats if you're going to. I was accused of suffering from white privilege. It became a whole thing. And it was just a reminder to me why this series, why this tool, why these practices for how we can bring grace to our political conversations is so important. So I'm going to go back to sharing the screen here and offer some of the summaries that our authors do as they set up the class or the book. Whoop. Let me try this again. Okay, there we go. So as we just said, the old rule was don't talk politics or religion. And one of the realities, these are some of the things that have getting in our way. I don't know if you guys have noticed this, but our political parties have become ideologically purified. There was a time where you had liberal Republicans. There was a time when you had conservative Democrats. Does anybody remember that? Mm-hmm. You don't have that anymore. And there's an interest, the Pew organization has been researching this for years and tracking that. And this is just a graph. Just since 1994, you can see how this is responses to 10 kind of issues, and seeing where the median Democrat and the median Republican landed on a kind of a scale of a typically conservative answer versus a consistently liberal one. And in 1994, they were reasonably close together. And again, 2004, they're the median, okay, Republican and Democrat, reasonably close together. But look at 2017, how much more we've become pushed to the more extreme, ideological edges in our party affiliations and in the way we see what a Democrat or Republican is. Pew has also been researching our views of the other party, and this is a big factor in how we can talk to each other. Back in 1994, 16% of Democrats viewed Republicans very unfavorably. 16%. And for Republicans, 17%, right? A minority for sure. By 2014, it had grown to 38% very unfavorable and 43% on the Republican side, viewing the Democrats as very unfavorable. And notice a third of them basically not only view them unfavorably, but now see the other party as a threat to the nation's well-being. That was a question Pew didn't even think to ask, in 1994. But now we have a third. Now, if you look at this same question, this was 2014. Here it is in 2016. Now you have that same question. 60% basically of Republicans see the Democrats as very unfavorable, and almost half say Democrats are a threat to the nation's well-being. And Democrats have virtually the same review. I don't have the 2018, 2019 surveys, but I am told it is now well over half of the two parties see the other as a threat to the nation's well-being. And here's one of my favorites. This is the question that they've been asking since the 60s. Would you be upset if your son or daughter were to marry a member of the other party? Back in the 60s, nobody cared, right? And I think it goes to the fact that, the ideology of the parties wasn't anywhere nearly as purified. You had Republicans and Democrats on both sides of the ideological spectrum. You remember the Rockefeller Republicans? What they used to call country club Republicans. They were pro-environment, they were pro-choice. Long gone. Conservative Democrats from the South, long gone. And so you see that sharp increase. And if you look at more recent surveys that I don't have a graph for this one, but yeah, they're now kissing 60% of Republicans and Democrats would be upset if their child were to marry a member of the other party. So that is an important factor in how it is that we the debate, the polarization has become so severe.
Father Chris, I have. Is that because one side is seeing the other as a threat? Is that because of who is president at that time, or what?
Well, let's keep going through these bullet points, because I think they would argue that it's kind of the summary. It's the sum result of a number of factors, right? Okay. One of them is the rise of profit-driven cable news, media bubbles, echo chambers, right? Where we have our views reinforced rather than challenged. So if you are a conservative, you can watch Fox News and you can live in a totally different reality than somebody who is watching MSNBC or CNN, for example. Did that exist in the 70s?
No.
It didn't even happen, right? As I recall, and you guys correct me if I'm wrong, but the news back in those days was almost like a public service of the three
channels,
of the three networks. Yeah,
That's right. It may have had its biases, but it was a lost leader, Chris. The movie Network points that out too, from '76.
Yeah, it was, almost like a public service, right? And that all began to change. So we have partisan media. That would be one reason why we see the kind of ideological purification of the parties. And one of the big problems there is that, of course, our our opinions are just reinforced and they're hardened. We hear nothing but them being reinforced, and that tends to harden our opinions, right? And social media is, of course, a big player in that, because social media then, once the algorithm of Facebook learns that you're a liberal or a conservative, you start to be fed different types of information. They don't feed you stuff to challenge you, by the way. They feed you stuff that will reinforce and be your existing views. Try it sometime for fun, and see what types of ads start showing up in your feed if you start liking certain posts in a way that's different than you normally.
I think you took some masks from my car yesterday.
I'm gonna just.
I don't think so.
I'm just gonna do a quick mute all because I saw some noise there. And there's also, this all has contributed to an increased willingness for us to demonize the other. So again, back to that post about concern that your child would actually marry a member of the other party. It's no longer about disagreement. It's about disgust. And I'm going to give you a cite to a TED Talk that talks about the rise of disgust in our political, in political opinions that differ from ours. It's no longer I disagree, it's you're disgusting. And therapists will tell you that when in a marriage, when a couple starts to use terms like disgust, you disgust me, they're headed for divorce. And that is that rise of disgust in the opposite view is a factor in this, and it's part of it. It raises the stakes, and it results in a kind of a new rule, right? Where and they suggest we still talk politics. It's just we only do it with those who agree with us now. I've seen many a political conversation kick off like this, where you kind of look both ways. Are we okay to talk about this? Are we all on the same page? And then you sort of let it go. And sometimes you get it wrong, right? And it's terribly awkward. But we're increasingly siloed as a country and as a people. I'm going to cut through those since I showed them to you. Any response to what you just heard there? Anybody want to share something, share a different opinion, or something that you've experienced? Any response?
I want to ask a question that I saw on the chat that
Yeah.
I just wonder if you have thoughts on. In this incredible movement toward divide, is there a moment that, or a cause that we can see of where did it shift from feeling like there was more tolerance, more willingness to have different views and speak of them to not?
What I've seen in my reading of this is you can't point to a singular fact. It's been a confluence of a number of shifts. It's about the change in media. It's about the changes in the way we receive information, and it's about the way that we can now become nicely siloed. And by the way, we all have we all prefer to have our opinions reinforced than challenged. That's just sort of natural human nature. And we live in a digital media culture now where that natural default mode can be reinforced again and again and again and again, such to the point, right, that we live in alternate realities. We really, in many ways, when it comes to politics.
I would like to say that I think that everything that you're saying is valid and is obviously backed up by data. And I do think that our country is more polarized now than it ever has been. But the 70s was not our halcyon days. I mean, we had, the Spiro Agnew calling anybody who disagreed with him part of an effete core of impudent snobs. It was Vietnam. It was, you know, Watergate. I mean, people were pretty darn polarized.
Yeah, that's an interesting. Yeah, you're right. You're right. Yeah, and I've seen that suggested. Does it feel different now?
Yes, it's more. It feels more. It feels bitter.
I think that's
Yeah.
the disgust factor.
It's
know,
And
harder to avoid.
I would
It's harder
add
to
that,
avoid with 24/7 coverage of it. At least in the 70s, you had 3 networks and the news was on for an hour a day.
Right.
Other
Now it's on
thoughts?
all the time
Yeah.
and
Right.
you can't avoid it.
Yep,
I
I
would
agree.
add-
And
I would
television and the
also
internet
add,
are, oh, sorry.
Hold on, just one at a time. Let me go ahead, Amy.
if people would research Lee Atwater, Atwater, he was a Republican strategist in the late 70s who basically formulated, and he basically was responsible for all the campaign things that destroyed Mike Dukakis. But he was sort of the architect of this, you know, nuclear kind of way of politics.
Which
No,
he
I'm not saying
regretted on his
I'm not saying
deathbed.
Democrats didn't do it too, but he really was an architect of this whole thing.
Well, yeah, and I've seen all kinds of examples from way back in the day, in the 1800s, about what some of the political candidates, presidential candidates in America used to throw at each other. I mean, it's always been hardball politics, and yet there still feels like something has changed. Rachel, you have your hand up. Go ahead.
Yes, I think money changed a whole lot. Money is buying politicians, and also social media. People think they can put anything and everything coming into their tongue or mouth or whatever, and they abuse each other so much, and that is the problem.
I think she's right. I think television and the social platforms, I'm jumping in, forgive me, are a mile wide and an inch deep, but they amplify and magnify often the wrong things, more heat than light as the expression goes. I think that's part of it. I think tied in with that is this search for self through politics more and more, which may have started with the cycle of cable news, and people are looking for a spiritual night's lodging sometimes through these platforms, in my opinion.
Sure. Yeah. And we will continue to talk about and discover, and I invite you all to keep your eyes now newly peeled to the factors you see in your daily life about what has caused our politics to feel different than it once did. You know, we've always been divided. We've always had debates, but what's different about it now? We'll continue to come back to that. We don't have to answer it all right now. Those are just some of it. But I want to now turn to what do the authors say? What are they suggesting? Why should we talk politics? And that is, do it with a sense of grace. Why should we have healthy political dialogue again? And they both come at this from a faith perspective, and I think they're right on. Their number one answer is we can't love each other if we are demonizing each other. You know, there's a fundamental spiritual divide here, or a spiritual challenge to all of us. You know, as Christians, we are called to be reconcilers. That is essentially our Christian mission. God is reconciling the world back to him, and we are reconciling each other to one another. We are in the business of bringing people together. That is the Christian mission. If you look in the Book of Common Prayer, it is the mission of the church, and we're not going to do that if we are instead deciding to write people off, to demonize people, to avoid them, and to not engage. And there's another argument, and that is we in fact need each other. That for societies to function in a healthy way, we need both sides at the table. We need our entire toolbox of differing values. And I want to show you a slide. This comes from a book that was, by the way, the second runner-up to this, to which book I was going to use for this class, The Righteous Mind, and that's by Jonathan Haidt, who's a moral psychologist. I'm just going to mute everybody again. I'm hearing something. There we go. He's a researcher of moral psychology, and he offers a really good perspective. He makes the case that we need each other. And he does so by first taking a look at this. And he makes the case, and it's not him doing it, it's research across from numerous moral psychology research, that there are 5 moral foundations: caring for others, fairness, a belief in liberty, the desire and the value of loyalty to the group, respect for authority and order. And then there's one called sanctity, which is like purity. It's where you get kind of the moral majority stuff, but also it can come across in arguments around the environment. But anyway, the point isn't to know all these, but to understand that if there are 5 kind of basic moral, six moral foundations, and these are cross-cultural. They are research shows they exist in other countries as well. The difference between liberals and conservatives is not that we don't share them, it's how we rank them. So liberals tend to land very high on caring for others. Conservatives, for example, very high on liberty. And here's a graph that kind of shows those different moral foundations, how they are ranked between folks who consider themselves very liberal or very conservative, with liberals tending to appreciate care for others and fairness very high. Conservatives, they tend to kind of group them a little bit more closely together. But the point that Haidt makes is we all share those same values. It's not that we don't share them at all. It's that we all do. And his argument is a functioning country, particularly a democracy, needs all of those tools in the toolbox. If we go too far on one extreme, right, they all have a shadow side. And if we go too far on the liberal extreme or the conservative extreme, right, each one of them have a kind of a shadow side when taken to an extreme. So their argument is we actually need each other. And secondly, we have more in common than we appreciate. So if you, for example, come at this from a liberal perspective, and you're having and you want to talk about a political issue with a friend who happens to be very conservative, you could pull out this slide and you could say, all right, they see liberty as really important. So if I'm going to try to convince them, I don't know, to pick a topic, let's say gay marriage, okay? I might choose to talk to them from the perspective of liberty. I might try to make an argument that, this is about basic liberty, human rights, and the life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. That's going to appeal more to a conservative than if you were to make the case from the perspective of fairness, for example. That's just one example, but do you follow what I'm saying there? But I think that's a powerful reminder that we need each other, and we'll probably come back to that again and again as we go. Obviously, democracy, a functioning democracy requires engagement. It requires an engaged populace. It requires civic engagement. We need to be having these conversations around our dinner tables and with our friends again, because politics makes policy. It makes a difference in people's lives, and democracy needs engagement. And it helps our communities and our institutions function better when we are engaged and not avoiding the topic, not getting burned out. It helps us to clarify our own values and our own priorities. When you have to do what, I think it was Chris, when you said your parents said to you, just know your issue, know your position, you had to do your own work. You had to clarify your own values a bit. You had to really ask yourself, why do I believe this? Rather than just take the party line. rather than just parrot the talking points. Talking politics with grace invites you to first check yourself and go, what do you really believe about this? What's at stake here that really matters to you? This class, this series is important because it's going to help us to rediscover complexity and nuance, which is, as somebody else pointed out, totally lost if you do much political debating on social media, right? It's all about black and white. It's all about binary arguments. You are either for or against. You cannot pray for Donald Trump, period. Or you're praying for the devil. Or people also posted on my Facebook wall, anybody who says they have trouble praying for the president isn't a Christian, okay? Both of those diametrically opposite, binary, polarizing statements were made on my Facebook wall when I posted that prayer. Talking politics is a chance to rediscover the reality that actually there's a lot of complexity there. People that struggle with praying for the president shared how they feel hurt and victimized. People who didn't like that idea shared that God calls us to love each other, period, and you're not a Christian if you don't. And part of me wanted to say, wait a minute, you're telling me you've never you're pure in this regard as well? Obviously not, right? There's complexity and nuance, which we don't get a lot of. It's a challenge to our natural tribalism, right? That one of the chapters that we're going to look at, one of the practices is to take off your jersey. That is to try to enter into graceful political conversations. We need to not be about our team as much and be more about the other person and ourselves. It helps us to grow in our relationships. I preached a few weeks ago about that passage from Matthew. When you've been wronged by somebody, you need to go to them because that's an opportunity to actually grow closer in relationship. When you disagree with people, you actually, if you can take the time and you can disarm yourself enough and you can try to listen hard enough and try to practice humility, disagreeing with somebody is an opportunity to get to know them better. And we'll talk about that more as we go, but that's an important thing to hang on to. Disagreement, the Mennonites argue disagreement is the Holy Spirit tapping us on the shoulder saying, hey, wait a minute, here's a chance to learn something about somebody. They disagree with you about this political issue. Wow, that's shocking. That may be shocking to you, but why don't you find out what happened to them in their life? What was their life experience? How were they raised? What are the values behind that they hold dear that is leading to them to this different political decision? It's a chance to grow in relationships. Even if you don't agree at the end of the day, you're going to know them better. And they're going to be rehumanized in the process. And that's the next one, reducing toxicity, right? Rehumanizing, ending the demonization. When you really take the time to talk to somebody, you're still going to disagree. It's not about, we all have to kumbaya, right? And come to a negotiated settlement on every issue. That's not what we're saying here. That's not what the authors are arguing. What they are arguing and what Jesus would argue for is that we see the other person as a beloved child of God, not as somebody to be in disgust of. So that's their argument about why we should be doing this. That's the first chapter. We have about 10 more minutes left, 8 minutes. Any responses to that? Any questions?
Chris?
Yeah.
My response is to remember a quite wonderful thing I heard in the late summer, early fall of 2016, the run up to the last election. And it is a story about a member of our parish. And I'm going to give her name because it's such a wonderful story about her. Many of you know Hugh and Debbie Sloan, who have been lifelong loyal Republicans. And there was some sort of social gathering. I heard this from a close friend who was there and saw this happen. There was a gathering that involved a number of Christ Church people, and I suppose others. And one member, I think a Christ Church person, was holding forth about the absolute necessity of electing Mr. Trump and probably, well, I don't know what that person had to say about Mrs. Clinton, but at any event, absolute diehard supporter of Mr. Trump. And Debbie Sloan, who by this time had moved very far away from the Republican Party. She said that she didn't leave the Republican Party, it left her. My friend who witnessed this said that Debbie leaned forward in her seat and said, with a gentle smile, "Please tell me why you believe that. Please tell me why you believe that." 8 simple words spoken quietly. That to me has always summed up what you have been talking about and what you've been excerpting from this book, Chris.
Yeah, thank you. That's a great, tell me more about that. I mean, therapists, right? I know we have some therapists on this call. What do we say? Say more about that. I hear you.
I want to say a word that I've been thinking all through this, and it's just exactly what you're talking about, Eric. It's just curiosity. You know, where is our instinct for curiosity about the other? Because without it, I don't think we can go very far.
And that is one of the chapters of the book that we'll be hitting with the authors. And I think it's called Get Curious. Exactly.
That's a good comment by Hunter. I remember a New Year's resolution I try to keep from last year that I saw somewhere was try to err on the side of compassion. That said, this marginalization or whatever that a lot of people feel for various reasons, which I appreciate we're going to talk about, Chris. And yet, for example, there are 2 or 3 times as many people at this forum, and I know forums do great at CCC, which is great. I love seeing everybody, by the way, than we would see in a Zoom coffee hour. So people, I think, all want the same basic things, and I'm not preaching here. They want to love and be loved, they want to be respected, and they want to be heard on some level. But the people here, I think, also want to try and understand better. At least that's my impression of what's going on and how to better deal with it.
Well, I think also another thing you said, Father Chris, is that it makes all the difference in the world to look past what a person is saying to say, why are they saying that and where have they come through and from in order to have some perspective.
Right. That's great.
I have a confession. I'm going to make a really quick confession and then turn over to you. When I recently asked a friend something like, tell me why you think that, she pointed out that I was betraying my own bias, that even in my question, that her view was wrong, and I needed to study how she got so wrong. So I'll stop with that. But I really was glad to know that, even curious.
Right. Yeah. So that's an important point to keep in mind. You know, these 9 practices that our authors have been honing and that we're going to be exploring, none of them are perfect still, right? This is human relations and we're still not going to play by the rules. But the hope is that you'll have a lot more tools in your toolbox to be a peacemaker in these conversations, to be able to stop yourself and to disarm yourself long enough to give it an opportunity, to create an opening for humility and reconciliation and listening. Go ahead. Yeah.
You know what people may not realize, my dad was very active in the union. We were very political. I helped elect Robert Kennedy. I used to pass out flyers when I was 5 years old. So my dad being in the union and things like that. But we were all Republican pretty much until child labor. That is what started the separation of the parties. People may not realize that, but when they had child labor laws, that's basically when the Democratic Party came into play. So that was what it was. And that is the basic underlying statement of the basic cause. So if people want to know how they basically started, it was when they were abusing child labor in the industry.
Interesting. Well, I just want to advise everybody too. Like, let's keep in mind that it's really important to me that as we go through this, that we allow all opinions to be voiced, that we share our own truth. Let's try to avoid appointing ourselves as the spokesperson for anybody else or the authority, the final authority on anything. So let's just try to keep an open mind. I want Republicans and Democrats, conservatives and liberals to be just at home in this conversation through the whole business. If we can't practice in this series what we're trying to learn about. So be careful what you guys put it. I love there's this huge conversation going on in the chat. I just want to, be mindful, everybody, that we, in the Gospel of John, Jesus's final prayer to his disciples is that we would be one. And so that is, that's our charge. Can we be one as we go through this class together? And I'm going to end us with a prayer that speaks to that point. But before we do that, I'm going to give you all, each one of these installments will have a little bit of homework, optional, of course, if you so choose to go a little deeper. This week, the homework, if you would like to have some, is to take a look at a couple of TED Talks, and I'll share this in an email and on the webpage, and you can send me a note if you didn't get it. But you can just go to YouTube and if you just Google on YouTube, if you just put in the search box Jonathan Haidt TED Talk, or put in there The Righteous Mind, both of these will come up. But he has two really good TED Talks where he essentially summarizes that book that I put up earlier, as well as some of those slides, and goes into it in a bit more detail. But I think it would really, for anybody who's really inspired by this, I've gained a new appreciation for those who differ from me, coming to grips with this idea that they are all coming from a valid moral foundation. It's just that we're ranking them a bit differently. And
Father Chris, go ahead.
So
Father Chris,
I'm just going to offer these two. Yeah, go ahead.
What brought you to this? I mean, what brought you to tackle this topic or conversation?
I'll tell you that story real quickly, and then I'm going to close us in prayer. Okay?
Yeah, and then put up the name of the book again, please.
The Righteous Mind. I'll put it in the it'll be in the email that I send out. But yeah, I mean, my passion to coming into this is a number of ways. One of the stories that I would cite the most is when Joe and I, my husband, when we got married. The laws had just changed and gay marriage was allowed. And so we had a huge wedding at the cathedral where I was working at the time. Everybody, it was a public wedding, right? There was some 600 or 700 people there. They don't know how many people were there because they couldn't all get in. It was standing room only. And it was because it was a celebration of the community in many ways. And we wanted it to be that way. And my stepmother, who had known me since I was a child, couldn't bring herself to be there. And it led to, she didn't agree with it, and it led to a falling out. And I remember calling her, and I started off as polite as I could, but that conversation went south fast. I couldn't believe that people I had known only for a year or two were coming to that wedding. My fraternity members from college came to that wedding. Relatives from around the country flew. How could she not manage to be there too? And it didn't, what I came to learn over time was exactly what Jonathan Haidt argues for. It wasn't that she didn't agree with me, it's that she was holding on to a value for her. And that value for her was her father's memory. She was Mormon, and she was holding on to her father's faith that he had passed on to her. It was his legacy for her in many ways. And her church didn't like the idea, frowned on its members attending such services. So she chose the need to be loyal to his memory and to her church in that moment. But it wasn't about me. And when I understood that, when I got that wider perspective, it opened the door just enough for me to be able to forgive her a little bit. And over a couple years later, about a year, 2 years later or so, after the girls were born, and we had their birthday party at Disneyland. They were 1 year old. I invited my dad and my stepmom. If you guys want to come down to Disneyland and meet the girls, love to have you there. And they came. And that opening was the beginning of reconciliation. You know, two cute girls in a Disneyland can change a heart. But it was really I think it was a relationship. It was keeping the door open, keeping the dialogue going, and letting go of my resentment. That helped. So that's the answer to your question, Shirley. That's why I'm passionate about this.
Thank you for sharing that. Thank you.
Should we close in prayer, my friends?
Yes, please.
Please.
This is the prayer attributed to St. Francis from the Book of Common Prayer on page 833. And I'll just pray it for us all. The Lord be with you.
And also with you.
Let us pray. Lord, make us instruments of your peace. Where there is hatred, let us sow love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is discord, union. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is darkness, light. And where there is sadness, joy. Grant that we might not so much seek to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand,
Yes.
to be loved as to love.
Yes.
For it is in giving that we receive, it is in pardoning that we are pardoned, and it is in dying that we are born to eternal life. Amen.
Amen. Thank you.
Amen.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you, Father Chris.
Thank you.
Thank you, and bless all
Great
of you.
to see all of you. Hey, Christine and Patrick.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you. Thank you,
Hey,
Father
Ernie.
Chris, and for the testimony. Thank you.
Thank you.